Good afternoon and welcome to our, 8th annual Littleton Historical Museum's Cemetery Walk. Today we have the opportunity to meet 4 of Littleton's prominent citizens from the past. Please take a little time to read your brochure. Hello, Jerry.
Well, thank you.
Your donations will be greatly accepted, and all are reminded to use the stairs and not to please walk on the embankments. Our first stop will be the final resting place of J.J. Barrett, where you will meet his mother, Mary Kenny Barrett. Our second stop will be to visit Caroline Iva Bellows, the beloved wife of Williams Bellows. The third stop will be John Barr. The final stop will be to visit Reverend Chutter. Remember, there's refreshments at the end of the tour, so each gravesite has several chairs if any of you would like to sit down for a few minutes while you're listening to the presentation. Now, if you'd kindly follow me to our first speaker, Mary Barrett.
Okay, guys. Reverend Chutter, and once again, welcome to the Littleton Historical Museum Cemetery Walk. This is the 8th year. In your papers, you'll see different years, but this is definitely the 8th. Take a little time, look through your brochures. And everyone's reminded to please use the stairs instead of the embankments. We don't want to tear up the lawns. Your donations are greatly accepted.
Over there in the pocket.
There's a jack-o'-lantern here, they're greatly accepted. We offer refreshments at the end. Our first stop isn't going to be J.J. Barrett, but we're going to go down and see Reverend Chutter. Join me, and there are refreshments at the end, and there are seats at each place to sit if you need to sit.
Welcome! Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Frederick George Chutter, and I welcome you here today. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about my life. I was born on September 12, 1857, in Chard, England. In my younger days, I did move to New England. I became very loyal to New England, even though being from England. I felt when I came to New England like I was an adopted son. I was taken in and loved. In my teens, I studied at the Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. I also did some studying in Maine at Colby University. When I was trying to determine what course my life would take, I decided to try preaching. And I preached in many churches throughout New Hampshire and Maine. But I also connected myself with a firm in Boston. And I studied the dry goods business. And I became very well grounded in the rudiments and the requirements of that trade. Now fast forward to 1887. I'm 29 years old. And in 1887, many changes happened in my personal life. The first was that I found our Lord and decided that is the road to which I would travel. I graduated from the Andover Theological Seminary. I came to Littleton in hopes of finding a church to which to become a minister. And the Congregational Church was looking for one. Now, to become a minister in that church was not easy, as you had to be voted in by delegates. Now, these delegates came from all over. They came from Massachusetts, they came from Maine. In Vermont, they came from Wells River, as well as many delegates from the local areas, such as Franconia, Lisbon, Bethlehem, Lancaster, Dalton. Well, I will share with you, I was quite nervous. However, they saw something in me and decided to vote unanimously to have me ordained and installed into as a reverend in the Congregational Church. If you go down on Main Street and you take a tour through their church, you will see my photo amongst many of the other distinguished reverends of that church. And if you look carefully at their stained glass windows, each stained glass window depicts a scene from the Bible. And you will find one that is dedicated to me. Which one it is? You'll have to go and find out. So, on September 9th, I became a minister at the Congregational Church. And a month and a half later, on October 19th, 1887, I had the great blessing of marrying Caroline, the love of my life, the most beautiful woman I have ever known. She was the daughter of the Honorable Eben Cutler. She was very well educated, and we were deeply in love. So we settled into the life in Littleton. I, the Reverend, and she, the Reverend's wife. Now, during my ministry, I was known to be an excellent speaker. I had good voice. I was an eloquent expander on the Word of God. My sermons showed care, both in the selection of the subject and in the treatment of such subjects. I confined myself to the manuscript readings, and when I read with rapidity, energy, and discriminating enunciation. Remember, I did spend time in Massachusetts, so I had to remember to pronounce all my R's. My style was ornate, and I abounded in metaphors. We truly felt this was what God had planned for us. But, as we all know, when you tell God your plans, He laughs. Because 4 years later, He had a different road for me. In 1891, for many reasons, we chose to leave the church and to leave Littleton. Actually, to leave the United States. We decided that we wanted to travel and study abroad. Went back to England. I took a course at Oxford University. And Caroline and I traveled all over. In August 20th, 1892, Caroline gave birth to our daughter, Mildred Caroline, in Oxford, England, and we were so happy. There I studied, I wrote, and I learned. I actually wrote a book, and it was published. It was called The Lectures and Travels in the Holy Land. And I am told, but I cannot be sure, that the copy of that book can still be found in the local library in Littleton. I also enjoyed writing a great deal of poetry. We returned in 1893, and many churches vied for me. But I chose to say no for medical reasons. Specialists had said it was best that I not go back into that profession full time. But even though I left the ministry, I still continued to preach. I would help other preachers out who were sick or maybe weary or having to go away, and I would take their places all over New Hampshire and Maine. And I was in quite demand for weddings and funerals. So the three of us settled into Littleton. We bought a beautiful home on Pleasant Street. And on August 23rd, 1893, Caroline gave me a son, Reginald. And the four of us were very happy. I soon learned real estate was the way to go, and I bought many properties. My goal was to improve upon their looks. I loved Littleton, and I wanted to make it even more beautiful. I purchased several properties. One of them was called the Chutter Block, Later on, it was called the Woolworths Block. I also bought the Boylston Building on Main Street, and there it was occupied by the Premier Theatre. I did my best to improve on these buildings. However, my greatest acquisition was a building on Main Street owned by the Dow brothers. Now, sadly, both of the brothers passed away. So I was able to purchase this building, and I made it into a dry goods store. Now, not only did I make it beautiful on the outside, but it was very artistic on the inside. And I would challenge anyone to try to list all of the items that I had for sale, for they were so many. And yes, for those of you who are curious, I'm sure there were some sweets that I did sell. It was very up to date and very particular. Okay. And I am told that the spot that still holds that name, Chudder's Dry Goods, is still in Littleton today. Now, in my personal life, I was a true believer in Littleton, New Hampshire. I loved this town. I believed in it for today, but I also believed in it for tomorrow, for its future. I chose to be on the Board of Education to help guide our young people in their learning. I was on the Board of Trustees for the Littleton Public Library. I was a very successful businessman. I am told, being humble, that I was warm-hearted, cordial, and of strong spirit of optimism. And life was wonderful. Until 1938, my dear Caroline passed away. It's quite sad. Chose to leave Littleton. I moved to Connecticut to be where my children were. And in 1941, I too passed away from injuries that I sustained in an automobile accident. For some reason, my family chose to have Connecticut be my final resting spot. So try as you might, as you walk around this fine cemetery, I am not buried here. However, my body is not buried here. But I will tell you this, my heart and my spirit will always be in the fine town of Littleton, the town that I loved. Now, I have mentioned places, some are still in existence, some I am told are long gone, and other buildings are in its spot. If you wish to know more about the buildings that were here, about my life, and about other people who made huge differences in the town of Littleton, may I suggest you go to the Opera House, go into the elevator, press B for basement, and go to the Historical Museum. And there the wonderful curator will show you all the photographs and documents of years gone by. I have a few photos here if you would like to take a look at them. And with that, I bid you a very pleasant good afternoon.
Thank you.
Well, hello and good afternoon. As she said, my name is Caroline Iva Bellows. Yes, you're right, the daughter of Samson Bullard from the high town of Concord, New Hampshire. Well, when I was born, Concord was quite the city. And you know, actually, when Concord became the capital in 1808, it had the largest state legislature in the entire country. You know us New Hampshire people, we've always been cream of the crop. Well, I married a man from Vermont, and we decided to put down roots somewhere right here in Littleton. You see, I'm a gardener, and I know that you need good roots to grow great flowers, and we did. We grew 3 great flowers. Our children, you see. There's our daughter. Her name is Mary Adams. You know, she's not married. You should talk to my husband. And then there's my son, my firstborn son, William Henry, named after his father. And then George Sampson, named after my father. Well, I better stop, because you know, once I start talking about those children, that's all you're going to hear. I know why you're here. Welcome to Bellows and Baldwin, the greatest clothes store around. It did used to be called Bellows and Brothers, but now it is Bellows and Sons, because my husband has passed it on to our son and his brother-in-law to run. You see, I'm surrounded by men of powerful heirs. I like to think of myself as Abigail Adams, one with a husband who's a president and one with a son who's a president. We know who really has the power around here, don't we? Oh, sorry, gentlemen, I didn't see you there. Well, out here in Bellows, we have quite the establishment. I have some ads for you while my sons and husbands are working. Here, look and see what's coming new. Take one. You're right, that is the Crawford shoe, the famous Crawford shoe. And we sell it right here in Littleton. Yes, the Crawford shoe that they sell in New York City. You can get right here. That's how high class we are. Well, while my son and my husband are working with somebody else, let me think about helping you. Oh, that's right. You must be coming in for a coat, because I haven't seen you in church lately, and you need a new church coat, don't you? Usually I'm not here, but I've been cleaning. You see, now we have polished brass fixtures and beveled glass fronts, and I know those women in the Unitarian Church, if they saw dust on those nickel fixtures, well, I would never hear the end of it, would I? Well, you see, there's a lot of stuff going on in Littleton now, but we're getting used to change, aren't we? The year I was born, James Monroe became president, and that year, Spain gave us Florida, and then they also gave up Panama and Peru and Mexico. We live in a world with a lot of change, don't we? You see, I know a lot about change, because I thought I was going to marry a lawyer. Well, he did pass the bar, and he did it wonderfully. And he started working with his brother, Henry A. But you know Henry A, don't you? We all know Henry A. Let's just say he's not as good as my William. So my William went into law work by himself. And then a couple years later, he joined with a man named John Farr. But, well, I like to say that my Henry is an early bloomer, because he retired early. But all of you people of Littleton were so nice, and you decided to make him your postmaster. And he did that for a while. And then he worked at the hardware store. And he did that for a while. And then he went and he fought in the War of the Rebellion as a major. And he did that for a while. But then he found his calling to clothe the men of Littleton, and you've all looked so much more dashing since, haven't you? Well, in our store you can find everything, from hats and coats to shoes, and all the best. Look right there in the bottom of those ads. See what one of the newspapers recently said about us. Fitted and stocked in metropolitan style and excellence. The store is large, light, and airy, and makes a showroom and sales room that is easily the superior of any in its line in the northern part of the state. The line of clothing is an extensive one, and either the farmer, the merchant, or the clerk will find among them piles of clothing on the counters just what he wants. You don't have to wear custom-made clothing if you buy from Bellows and Baldwin. Isn't that wonderful? We make sure you all know that. I'm so proud of my men. I mean, who do you think clothes them to begin with? Not my mother-in-law, I'll tell you. If she had her way, William would be wearing peasant clothing. Well, I'm so glad you joined us. I do think I see my son coming now, though, ready to help you. But before you go, remember to tell your mother I said she's welcome to come by for tea and scones. I was talking to her in the market the other day. We were talking about the price of sugar. 8 cents! Oh, who can afford desserts?
Today, and I'm so happy to be here to tell you about my son James. And with me are two of my children. I have my oldest son who sadly passed away at age 7, but he is, my grandson in reality, is portraying who? You say it?
Thornton?
Thornton Barrett.
Oh.
And he was my firstborn son. And I have my friend here who is
Lorinda.
portraying Lorinda. And what year were you born, Lorinda?
1812.
1812. Thornton was born in 1808 and lived to 1815. I had 7 children total, James being number 6, our 7th son we adopted. Sadly, as I said, one passed at age 7 and I had a daughter that passed at age 6. And back then, children didn't always survive childhood, very sadly, but families were large because of it. I married Joseph Barrett in the late 1700s, and we raised our family in what was then called Lloyd Hills, New Hampshire, which is now Bethlehem. And we were farmers, and we were growing and making everything that we needed to live on. We were our own entity. James, however, if you've ever had a child who wanted nothing to do with the family business, wanted nothing to do with farming, but instead he was a reader. He loved to read, and he had, even at this age, James had many, many books in his library that he collected. Well, when James turned 30, he moved from Bethlehem to Littleton because he found out that the railroad was coming through, and that was in 1853. And after all his reading and studying and schooling, he knew the law, he knew insurance, he knew how to write deeds for property. He did so many things for people. I say he had a heart for farmers and their families, but not a heart for farming. He owned a home right on Cottage Street, and if you came out Kilburn, if you know where Kilburn Street is, and diagonally across at Cottage Street before you get to Grove Street is where his house sat. And he invited my husband Joseph, his dad, and me over quite a bit, and we just always admired his library and his artifacts, and you could tell what kind of person he was just by his books and his artifacts. He owned property behind that house, quite a bit of property. And because he loved the farmer and the families so well, he decided to develop that property behind his house, and he made a road back there. He lined the road with willow trees on each side. And then he developed the road into individual lots. And he asked people to come and live there for a very reasonable amount of money. If they couldn't do it, he would lower the money. He would lower the rate, just so people could live there. He just had a heart, such a big, big heart for the people, for the farmers especially. He was an insurance man, like I said. He owned the first insurance company right in Littleton, right in the Tilton block on Main Street in Littleton. That story about the street and developing that was told and retold, and was just such an amazing, heartfelt story about James. Another story was that he was a selectman in Littleton. He also was chair of the select board. He was a state representative for the state of New Hampshire. And one of the things that he did while he was selectman, when it became time for the Civil War, it was the early 1860s, and there was a quota for the number of men from this area who had to join, who had to volunteer and go. In order to get them to go, he had an incentive, and his incentive was financial. So if you went and signed up for a year, you got $100. If you signed up for 2 years, you got 200. You signed up for 3, you got 300. And if you were a resident for quite a long period of time, when you could prove your residency, you could get as much as $1,000 for a 3-year volunteer draft. He did have a heart for the people of the town of Littleton. James also married. He married Lydia Ann Smith, who was from Brownington, Vermont, and they had 3 children. Sadly, their middle child, Alice, passed away at 2 years old. Again, the infant mortality, the children's rate of mortality was very high. But I do thank you for coming, and I will have one of my children pass out some little candy for you. Would you like to do that, Thornton? Yes. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
I'm John Farr, and I'll tell you, this is where I'm buried. I was married 3 times, and as I said, our wives didn't hold on too well back then. We would go through wives like we went through socks. You could darn a sock, sometimes you could darn your wife, but most of the time, they just died rather than being darned. So, this is where I am. My first wife is here, Trifina. Someone thinks it's something you should take medication for, but that's my wife. She gave me 7 children. Trifina. So you see how closely we're buried. My second wife is Elizabeth, right here. No children, and you see where we're buried. And I think that's probably one of the reasons. All right? My third wife is Emma. She's here, gave me 1 child. I fathered 8 children. You have to remember, back then, we had coal stoves and winter was cold. Now, as John Farr, I'm not going to speak a lot about me, but just some of my background. I was a lawyer, but I worked with, first, before I became a lawyer, I worked with Major Brackett. Now, Major Brackett had a store downtown Littleton. I was a merchant, and Brackett's store was located over in here. And I worked, because this photograph was taken in 1860. So I worked with Major Brackett. Now the interesting thing is Major Brackett and I split our partnership, and I went into business alone. The interesting thing about it is that Major Brackett is buried about 6 stones over. So we're still in the same neighborhood. All right? I opened up a business, and my business, this photograph was 1850. My business was right there. There's a Methodist church. At this time, the Methodist church was brand new. In 1888, it may not look much like the Methodist church, but in 1888, I remember big Deweys in town. The Methodists wanted to have a hall where they could have dinners and they could have social events. So they jacked the whole church up by hand and they built the hall underneath. All right. So my building was right here, the John Farr. Right next to it was the Granite Hotel. You know something? The people who ran the Granite had no idea how to run a business. That business opened 3 times. They changed hands, never made it as a hotel. Became the Littleton Fire Department. Because the sign in the front of it, there's one photograph that says billiards room. Then there's another photograph that the billiards room is gone and it says fire department. Right next to it was where the Littleton newspaper was published. This was in 1850. Now, so I went into business for a while. Now another thing about being where I'm buried is her husband, he was a lawyer. You heard that over there? Mm-hmm. He taught me law. I worked with him and I studied the law. Back then, you did not go to school. One did not go to school to become a lawyer. You could get some, but most of the time you read the law with someone. So you found someone, a lawyer, who would take you in and teach you the law. So I became a lawyer. I also became a member of the school board. I was on the committee for building the first school in Littleton. I was a selectman, I was a councilman. I was a deacon at the Congregational Church. I was an abolitionist. I belonged to the anti-slavery movement. And I remember Edmund Carleton and his wife. I don't know if you know this, but they had a home up on Carlton Street in the you call it Apthorpe. When I was young, it was called Scythe Village, because they had a factory there that made scythes. All right, and it was a rather dangerous job making those. They'd be sharp, you'd get cut, you'd bleed to death, and then you'd join me here. Now, they had a place in Scythe Village, a house that they had built, and they were part of that Underground Railroad for helping the unfortunate slaves escape to Canada and to freedom. And they actually, in their basement, had fake walls that rocks would be pulled out, and this is where they would hide. And the slaves would follow the Ammonoosuc River as far north as they could, then switch off to another, and they'd follow the rivers north, and eventually into Canada. But I knew them, and they were really quite the people. They used to get thrown out of the Congregational Church all the time. The preacher would be up there speaking a sermon, and they'd get up and start about abolition and anti-slavery, and the ushers would show them the door. And they did, right out on Main Street in the dirt. So I was a very, very active individual at the time, and very proud of it. As I said, I had 8 children. Now, something I want to bring up. 2 of my sons, actually 3 of my sons, one son's buried there, John Jr. All right, he lived, he went beyond me, but 1902. One of my sons was Evertsfar. Evertsfar is buried, do you see the tall obelisk with the bird on top? The eagle? It's the second one down on the left. That's where Everts is buried. Now my son Evert went to Dartmouth to become a lawyer. Quit after his first year and joined the military to fight for to preserve the Union. And in the battle at Fredericksburg, my son was shot and lost his right arm. And he was a captain, so he had a pistol. And when he was shot, he dropped the pistol, picked it up in his left hand, and kept on fighting with his arm hanging there. All right, and then he walked back to the surgical tent and had it amputated. He was one of the few who survived an amputation. He came back to Littleton. He was promoted to be a major, and he became a recruiter, and he became bored with that. So they sent him back into war, one arm, and he led men in the battle with one arm. I don't know how we swung that sword and stayed on a horse at the same time. It doesn't take after me. I mean, I fall walking up a flight of stairs. All right. So that was Evert. Evert studied law under me, passed his law, went to Haverhill, passed his law, the bar, and became a state representative. Worked for Littleton politically, and at the age of 40, dropped dead. All right. His wife, Ellen Frances Burpee-Fard, I loved her. She was wonderful. An artist, incredible artist, incredible artist. After my son died, my daughter-in-law moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, to the 2 children, and then she moved to California, and she bought a building, and an old tile building, and she opened up an art studio. And the doctor told her she always wanted to go to Italy to study art. Doctor said, don't go. She went. And they brought her body back on the same boat she went over on. And she's buried over there. My other son that I'd like to speak about, George. George was also in the Great Rebellion, but George was a hotel man. Do you know where the high school is located? All right, is it still the same one that we built in 1867? That was interesting. 3 floors, massive building. And the top floor was open, and the children would play sports there until the plaster started falling down. And they stopped them from playing sports because they figured that it was dangerous having the plaster chunks fall on them. So the school board voted to get rid of athletics in the school system, and they put in something less dangerous. They had a debating club. So they would go up and debate, and the plaster still fell. Then they condemned the 3rd floor. And after that, they built the, what was the school? Kilburn School. Pardon? The one in back of the high school. The Kilburn School. Now, my son George, before I get too far off the subject, it isn't often I get out of here, so I just build up so much over like 100 years, it's just like, it's everywhere. All right. So, my son George was a hotel man, and he built the Oak Hill House. You familiar where Oak Hill Avenue is? Up in back of the high school, there's a hill. There's School Street keeps on going straight up, and Oak Hill Avenue goes this way. Well, at the corner of School and Oak Hill, there was a 170 guest hotel built there. It was monstrous, and my son ran it, and it was state of the art. State of the art. Gas lighting, and we did not have gas up here. And what they did, there was a stone that they would put into water, and it would produce a gas. And they would put a cover on a barrel, and the pipes came out of it, and that's how they lit the hotel. You didn't want to get too close to that barrel in the basement, especially if you smoked. All right? It had everything. An incredible view. At one time, you know, you could swing a dead cat and hit a hotel downtown Littleton. All right, during the 1890s, we actually had accommodations for about 700 to 800 people in Littleton. There were hotels everywhere. Now, I've got to get back to my son George. My son George was in March 18th. I remember it. Well, not quite well, because that was 2 years after I died, but I got word about it. All right? But March 18th, George got in his buggy and with the horse, and they went down to the village to conduct business. He was 60 years old, a very old man, as considered at that time. Now, 60 is the new 59. So George got in his buggy and went down to the village. On his way back, thank goodness his buggy was only 1 horsepower, because George died, and the horse knew enough to pull off to the side of the road. And when he did not come back to the hotel, people wondered where he was. They went and found him, and there he was, frozen in the front seat of his buggy, and the horse was being patient. Now, they took and they had the funeral in the lobby of the Oak Hill House. Now, I hear tell now that the historical museum here in Littleton, which is utterly phenomenal. It's just not many of them are like this around. We have, I understand they have everything right down to Betty Davis's skull. I don't know, but they actually have a key for the Oak Hill House, a sugar bowl from the Oak Hill House silver, and a room number. So if the spirit moves you to come down to the museum, you could probably see that. I know someone who will let you in. So I'll go back to George. They had a large funeral for him in the lobby. George was buried. He's over there. George was buried. And 2 weeks later, they should have shut down the furnaces. The Oak Hill House burned to the ground. 1895. And it was massive. As a matter of fact, most of Hillside Park, which I guess you call Remick Park now, most of Remick Park was actually property for the hotel. They had formal gardens that you could walk through and hiking trails all up through there. Now I understand that there are houses. So, I've talked about my sons. I've talked about my wives, the ones I liked, and the ones who was over there. Do you have any questions?
Who did you say is buried here at the end?
Who's here?
Yes.
That's Stella.
Who is she? Who's Stella?
Oh, who's Stella? Stella was a daughter. Now, she died 1935. She made it pretty long. She was one between me and Trifina. So we try to keep the family as closely as possible. you have any other questions?
There are a couple of granite steps up on Pleasant Street that used to lead up to the Oak Hill House.
Really? On Pleasant Street? Well, I must fly out of here someday and take a look. Halloween is coming. I have another trip out. Does anyone, any other questions or historical factuary?
So,
What is the oldest?
4 boys and 3 girls?
No, there were actually out of 8. I had what? I don't remember. When you have that many, you have no idea what they are. You just kind of like point, grunt. It's one of those things for those of you who had children, and you go, John, Peter, and then you start calling him the cat's name. I believe we had 3 girls and 6 boys.
That's not.
Well, then maybe we had less. Most likely we had less.
Do you know where the oldest stone is?
Oh, most definitely. My father, Noah, had a farm up on Far Hill. And we are connected with that. Most people think Noah built a boat. No, he built a farm. It was right up the street. Do you have any other questions?
Do you know where the oldest stone is in the cemetery?
I think it's my kidney stone. No, I'm not sure. I don't know. We really, you know, when they put us in, we really don't bother much with other people. So it's like we really just don't. It's like it's none of our business. I mean, we're dead.